Hello everyone, welcome back to lecture 4. So, in the previous lecture, we have learned how to construct the demand curve, right. So, just as the supply curve tells us the quantity supplied at each and every price from p equal to 0 to p equal to infinity, the demand curve tells us, okay. So, let us write down. So, the demand curve tells us the quantity demanded, the demand curve tells us the quantity demanded at each and every price from p equal to 0 to any other number, right. So, we used the information that was given to us in the problem and we constructed the demand curve, right. So, the word demand and demand curve will be used analogously. This stepped or the staircase line shaped figure that you see is our demand curve, right. Now, do all demand curves necessarily have to look like this? No, I'll give you another example where the demand curve will be just a downward sloping line, right. So, we will see that later. But more importantly, this simple example tells us something very, very interesting. It tells us that when buyers are deciding what quantity they want to buy, which is their individual quantity demanded, they are computing the net gain, which is the worth minus the total paid. When we get that information and aggregate it across all the buyers, we get the total quantity demanded. And here this point of this price of p equal to 0.3 is very interesting, right. So, let's identify the p equal to 0.3 here. So, p equal to 0.3 is a number here, okay. So, let's use a different color. So, this price p equal to 0.3 is interesting. I will call it as p star, right, and that is the price where two things are equal, right. At p star, the quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied, right. Notice at p star the quantity demanded could either be 6 or 7 or 8, but there is a possibility that the quantity demanded is 7, and that possibility may arise if buyer 1 buys 3 units, buyer 2 buys 2 units and buyer 3 of course buys 3 units, right. So, let us make a note of that. So, after several rounds, once the participants have understood how things are working out, right, after several rounds of trading, all trades, or rather we will say that in which the participants have learnt more about their guesses, all trades will take place close to a single price, which is p star, which is rupees 0.3 per unit, and at this price buyer 1 will buy 3 or 2 units, buyer 2 will buy 2 or 1 unit, and buyer 3 of course will buy 3 units. So, that the total here, whether I take 3 plus 2 plus 3, let me rewrite this, sorry. So, it is not, so I will just say that buyer 2 will buy 1 or 2 units, right. So, 3 plus 1. So, buyer 1 will buy 3 or 2 units. If I take that combination 3, buyer 2 will buy 1 unit and buyer 3 will buy 3 units. So, 4 plus 3 is 7, or buyer 2 will buy 2 units, buyer 1 will buy 2 units, buyer 2 will buy 2 units. So, that is 4, and buyer 3 of course will buy 3 units. That combination also adds up to 7 units, right. So, this is the combination where and this occurs only at a price of P star equal to 0.3. Notice, at no other price did we find a match between quantity demanded and quantity supplied. Notice, we started with a price of 1, we started with a price of 0.9, we started with a price of 0.5, and after multiple rounds we arrived at a price of 0.3, right. Now, there is no way for us to a priori know that the equilibrium price would have been 0.3. We arrived at this 0.3 after multiple rounds of iterations, right. So, each time we took a price, we asked what is the quantity demanded, we asked what is the quantity supplied. We kept repeating this exercise till we found a match between the quantity demanded and quantity supplied, right. So, that is the price at which the two things are equal. So, this is sort of the equilibrium price. P star equal to 0.3 is the what I will call as the equilibrium price. Or if you prefer, sort of a steady state price, right. So, if you leave this system at the current level, the price will continue to be 0.3 unless there is some exogenous shock to this system, right. What I mean by that is, if the information that we had was as given in this setup, in this page, whatever information we have, 6 participants, 3 of them are sellers, 3 of them are buyers, sellers are given something, some good, buyers are given some money, and we are told something about how much the good is worth to them. If this is what we have every single day, right. So, today this is the information, tomorrow also the same information is there, day after tomorrow also the same information is there, the equilibrium price will continue to be 0.3 rupees per unit, right, and 7 units will be traded. So, I claim now that we have addressed our first question that we started with, right. We said, what determines price? What determines price? When we had drawn the supply curve alone cannot determine the price, because we used various prices to derive the supply curve. The demand curve alone cannot determine the price, because we used various prices to construct the demand curve. Now, once I have the demand curve and supply curve, we identified where they intersect, right. That is the point which we called as the equilibrium, right. So, in this graph, at a price of 0.3 per unit, the quantity demanded and quantity supplied matched, and that is what we said is the equilibrium, price. So, to answer our first question, which is what determines price, it is the interaction between the demand and supply which determines the price. Price is determined from the intersection of the demand and supply curve. Okay. Price is determined from the interaction, or in fact, you could also say interaction or intersection of the demand curve and the supply curve. P star is called the equilibrium quantity. So, P star, and there is also the Q star, which is here the 7 units. So, P star was rupees 0.3 per unit. So, this Q star equal to 7 is called the equilibrium quantity traded. Okay. Now, let us look at a few other interesting terminology, right. So, if I go back to this graph, okay, and if I take a price, let us say I take a price of P equal to 0.7, let us say. Now, at this price P equal to 0.7, notice my quantity supplied is 7 units, but my quantity demanded is only 2 units, right. So, as before, there is a mismatch between quantity supplied and quantity demanded, which will put a downward pressure on the price, right. So, this is called the excess supply. excess supply, right. So, for a price P which is greater than the equilibrium price P star, the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded. So, there is an excess supply, and if there is an excess supply, there is going to be a downward pressure on the price. Right. So, the price will try to come down to the equilibrium level. On the other hand, let us take a price of, let us say 0.1. If I take a price of 0.1, the quantity demanded, notice, is somewhere here, whereas the quantity supplied is somewhere here, is 7 units, right. So, this gap where the quantity demanded is more than the quantity supplied is called the excess demand. People want to buy more, but only 7 units are available, right. This will lead to an upward pressure on the price, right. So, what we now learn is that when P is greater than P star or when P is less than P star, right. So, at a price P, so at P greater than P star or when P is less than P star, right, there is either going to be an excess supply, here there is going to be an excess demand. But at P equal to P star, notice that is an equilibrium. So, the quantity demanded is exactly equal to quantity supplied. So, there is no excess. So, the excess supply is 0, the excess demand is also 0. This is what is called as the market clearing condition. Okay. This is called the market clearing condition, right. So, neither is there an excess supply nor is there an excess demand. Whatever buyers want to buy, the sellers are willing to sell, and somehow the market clear. Okay. Now, the only part of our discussion which is still where we have still not been precise about is this notion of what a market is. And I claim that now we have a complete characterization of what a market is. So, let us write it down more formally. Okay. So, let us mention that. So, I have used the word market in the previous lectures as well. I have just used it as well here. So, what do I mean by a market, right? So, a market must have the following things. It has the group of buyers. So, the market consists of the set of buyers. This is the demand side of the market. A set of sellers, which is the supply side of the market. The good that is being traded, in our example it was pencils. And the most important, right, so I will put a star to indicate. So, you need the set of buyers, this is the demand side of the market. You will need the set of sellers, which is the supply side of the market. The buyers and sellers are buying and selling or trading something. But the most critical part is rules which are governing, under which trade takes place, right. This is the critical part, right. Now, in our example, what were the rules? Well, we knew this was the buyer side of the market, the buyers or the demand side of the market. I had information about the seller, so that was the supply side. They were trading the good, which was pencils. But what were the rules? The rules were what was given on this piece of paper, right. So, that the rules were that there are 3 sellers, 3 buyers, seller 1 is given 1 pencil, seller 2 is given 2 pencils, seller 3 is given 4 pencils. For buyers, we were given information about how much the pencils are worth, right. So, the rules were what is given here. So, the rules under which trade takes place were given on this piece of paper, right. You change the rules, your outcome is also going to be different, right. And notice that there is nothing good or right or wrong about the way we have computed the equilibrium price, right. The market system is one way of allocating the good, right. I could have various ways of allocating a good. For example, one way of allocating a good could be first come first served, right. So, I have 7 pencils, I am going to say that I am going to allocate that good on a first come first served basis. So, I ask people to stand in a line, people in the and let us say I say no more than 2 per unit or no more than 1 per unit. So, if it is no more than 1 per unit, the first 7 individuals in the line get the pencils, the ones standing in the line from 8th and beyond that do not get the pencil. That is one way of allocating it. Is that a good way of allocating it? We do not know, right. Just as we do not know whether the current way of allocating is a good way of doing it, right. But it's one way of allocating the goods. For example, the local vegetable vendor from which you buy your vegetables, right. So, that is an example of a market system where you go, the vendor is there with her produce. So, one difference there is bargaining takes place, bargaining or negotiation takes place. The vendor quotes a price, you think that the price is too high, you ask for a lower price, and eventually after a couple of rounds of negotiation, you agree at a price over which the trade is going to take place. That is one way of allocating the good. In our example, the rules did not allow for negotiation or bargaining. Notice also that the rules said nothing about what the buyers are going to get or can the buyers resell the product. We did not know anything about it. What will the sellers do if they do not sell the product, right? None of that information was given to us. We constructed the supply and the demand curve based on the information that was given to us. More importantly, the rules under which trade took place, right? So keep in mind that for a market, right? So, whenever you use the word market, there are these 4 things that you have at the back of your mind. You have the demand side of the market, which is people who are buying the good. You have the supply side of the market, which is the set of sellers. You have the good that is being traded, in this case the pencils, and finally, you have rules under which the entire trade is taking place. Okay. So in the stylized examples, I will just make a note that in this example, in our example, rules were stated at the beginning, which was the information about the buyers and the sellers. Okay. So, notice that how from first principles we have constructed a demand curve, a supply curve, and have identified the equilibrium. In fact, this graph has a name, it is the market for pencils. The market for pencils has the demand curve, the buyer's side has the supply curve, the seller's side, the good, which is pencils, and the rules under which trade takes place, right. The rules allowed us to figure out what the equilibrium was. Okay. Now, so there was a little bit of work that we had to do to arrive at the equilibrium. Is it the case that in all instances we will have to start from first principles to derive the equilibrium? Not always, because let me give you one other example where let us say somebody has already done the hard work and has identified or estimated the demand curve and supply curve. These are not trivial exercises, by the way, but let us for the moment suppose that the marketing research team in your firm has estimated the demand curve, somebody else has estimated the supply curve, and these are given to us, right. So, what I mean by that is, in the previous example, we constructed the demand and supply curves from first principles. From first principles, right. Suppose someone has estimated the demand and supply curves as follows. So, suppose I have two equations. I am going to use Q to denote quantity, and let us say I am given this equation 600 minus 2 times P. Now, notice by simply looking at this equation, I can know that this is the demand curve. How do I know that? Because there is an inverse relationship between the price and the quantity demanded. Right? There is an inverse relationship between the price and the quantity demanded. What I mean by that is, if the price increases, the quantity demanded will fall. If the price decreases, the quantity demanded will increase, right. If it helps, you can also put this subscript D to denote that you are really talking about the demand curve. But I say, but I feel that is unnecessary, because by simply looking at this inverse relationship, you will know that this is essentially a demand curve. Similarly, let us say somebody has estimated a supply curve which is 300 plus 4P. I do not need the qualifier S, but I will put it once, right. So, Qs equals 300 plus 4P. This is a positive, so this is a negative relation. So, this is a positive relation between the price and the quantity supplied. Right. So, suppose we are given these equations, right. So, somebody has estimated these demand curves, and we are told that the demand curve and supply curve are given by these equations, right. Unlike the previous case, notice, where we had to spend a lot of effort to figure out what was the net worth, ask what is the quantity supplied at each and every price, what is the quantity demanded at each and every price, aggregate for each buyer, aggregate across the buyers to get the total quantity demanded. Here I am simply given two equations, right. So, let us first graph these two equations. So, let us draw a graph here. As always, on the y axis we will plot the price P in rupees per unit, and on the x axis we are going to be plotting both the quantity demanded and quantity supplied. So, let us start with the quantity demanded. Now, this is a straight line 600 minus 2p. To draw a straight line, I need 2 points, right. So, let us start with the demand curve. So, at a price P equal to 0, right. So, if I take this demand curve equation, at a price P equal to 0, the quantity demanded is 600 units. Alternatively, I know at what price is the quantity demanded 0, right. I can ask at what price is the quantity demanded 0, right. So, essentially I have 0 equals 600 minus 2p. If you do the arithmetic, you will see that the price is 300 rupees per unit, right. So, I know that at a price of 300 rupees per unit, the quantity demanded is 0. So, I have 1 point on the demand curve, and at a price P equal to 0, the quantity demanded is 600 units, right. So, if I join these 2 points, I get my demand curve. This is my demand curve, right. Similarly, if I now look at the supply curve, again that is a straight line, right. So, 300 plus 4p. So, if I start at p equal to 0, right, if I start at p equal to 0, notice that the quantity supplied is 300 units. Quantity supplied is 300 units, right. So, I have quantity supplied of 300 units. Let me put it here. and I can take any other price, right. Either I can take P equal to 1 or P equal to 2 or P equal to 10, P equal to 25, whichever one, right. So, at P equal to 25, the quantity supplied is 300 plus 100, which is 400 units. So, at P equal to 25, the quantity supplied is 400 units. But notice that is going to be some point here, and I can just connect those 2 points and get my supply curve, right. So, now notice, compared to this graph where I had a supply curve which was vertical and the demand curve which was sort of a stepped line, my supply and my supply and demand curve here look a little different, but they still follow a similar kind of a trend, right. Imagine that you are a seller. As the price that you get for your product is going to be higher, is a larger number, the more is the amount of units that you would want to sell, right. So, quantity supplied, as the price is higher, the quantity supplied also increases, right. So, it is like if you get a higher price for your produce, you would want to sell more and more of your produce. Alternatively, conversely rather, for the demand side of the market, higher the price, the less is the quantity that you buy, lower is the price, more is the quantity that you want to buy, right. So, there is this inverse relationship, right. So, now I know from the graph that the equilibrium, so the market equilibrium is P star. So, the equilibrium price P star is the price at which the quantity demanded and quantity supplied are equal. So, if I compute the quantity demanded at P star, so essentially what I am trying to say is quantity demanded at P star must equal the quantity supplied at P star, right. So, let us compute the quantity demanded at P star. Well, I already know what the equation is. So, essentially 600 minus 2 times P star must be equal to the quantity supplied at P star, which is 300 plus 4 times P star, which implies that 6 times P star equals 300, which is going to give me P star equals rupees 50 per unit. So, that is the equilibrium price, right. So, I figured out that the equilibrium price is P star equal to 50, right. So, this is my P star. Now, what is the equilibrium quantity traded? Well, this is the price at which the quantity demanded and quantity supplied are equal. So, I can either use the demand curve, right. So, from the demand curve I will get the Q star is 600 minus 2 times 50, 600 minus 100, which is 500. Alternatively, from the supply curve I will get Q S star equals 300 plus 4 times 50, 300 plus 200, which is also 500, right. So, that is going to be this quantity, which is 500, right. So, just as the previous example, it is the intersection of the demand curve and supply curve which gave us the equilibrium price. Even now in this example where we are given equations of the demand curve and the supply curve, the intersection between the demand curve and the supply curve is giving us the equilibrium price. And as before, you will also notice that for a price P which is greater than P star, the quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded. So, there is an excess supply, right, and for a price which is below the equilibrium price, the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied. So, there is an excess demand, right. So, in this discussion I have taken you through 2 examples, one where we had to do a little bit more work, start from first principles to identify what the equilibrium was. In the second example, we were given equations of demand curve and supply curve, and we used that information to get the equilibrium price P star and the equilibrium quantity Q star. But notice in both the cases, right, the overall idea behind computing the equilibrium was the same. And what is the market here? Well, the market here includes the demand side, which is captured by the demand curve, the supply side, which is captured by the supply curve, and the rules, well, the rules are captured by these equations, okay. So, what we will do next is, we will ask, well, if price is determined by the intersection of the demand curve and the supply curve, what will cause the price to change? Well, price will change if either the demand curve or the supply curve or both change, right. And in our next lecture, we will try and understand what are factors that change the demand curve, what are factors that change the supply curve.